Okay, and it's time. So welcome to Vote.j Q&A question time with the St Peter Connétable candidate, Richard Vibert. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much.
And just a reminder of how these things work. You can get your questions in at home to your candidate, Richard. Just there's a Q&A box on your screen which you can put your questions into. I just ask that the questions are fair and that they are clean, obviously, as well. But you can do that, and Richard will have 1 minute in which to answer your question. And we are strict on timing, as we have been throughout these Q&A sessions. And I'm going to start by asking you, you're obviously up for re-election. You're hoping to be re-elected.
Yes.
What in your last term do you feel you didn't achieve that you are burning to get sorted this time around if you get elected?
Right. I think some of the green initiatives that we had hoped to create some more green lanes, and that's held up partly because we need to transfer roads from infrastructure. Also, we're looking at trying to open some of the old pathways, and there are legal issues there which we have to resolve. But that's one of the things I very much wanted to achieve, and sadly I haven't been able to.
Okay, and you talked about opening up some pathways and the green lanes, etc. And one of the issues, which I know is an island-wide issue, but pretty much a lot of parishes have, is the issue of speeding. Do you think you're doing enough to tackle that?
Speeding's an island-wide issue, and personally, I believe that we probably have to introduce some sort of speed camera. We no longer have the resources. Most parishes don't have a full complement of honorary police. The state's police are stressed. The only way you can resolve speeding is by policing it, and I think we have to introduce speed cameras, and I would certainly vote for that. Okay,
thank you. Now, with the there's been several issues which have cropped up time and time again on the doorsteps for candidates, I know. One of them has been the voting system. There's been some dissatisfaction, and what people feel is that the lack of the island mandate. What are your feelings on that, and would you do anything about that if you were to be re-elected?
There certainly has been dissatisfaction. I think the vast majority of houses I've called at, and I've covered a lot of the parish, have raised the issue of the new voting system. People would like to see an island-wide mandate returned. People are unhappy that, in fact, they weren't asked about what system they would like, and some have asked if a referendum had been called. I know that was suggested and rejected last time, but I certainly would vote for an island-wide mandate. I would like to see the constables retained, but I would like to see something like 37 island-wide members and 12 constables.
Okay, and talking about the connétable role, the constable role, do you feel that constables should be focusing only on the parish, or do you think it's good to go for ministerial roles in government?
That's an interesting one, and I think my view on that has changed. When I started out, I thought that constables shouldn't perhaps go for ministerial roles. I now believe that that's possible, provided you're willing to do the work, and that does mean doing two jobs. You can't neglect the parish work, but you've also got to put in the full time as a states member. There is a ministry that personally I would like, and we'll have to see if I'm successful.
Would you tell us what that might be? Or?
Well, I would like the children's ministry. I'm the Assistant Minister for Children and Education. I am not necessarily convinced that bringing children and education together, they're two very large areas, was necessarily a good thing. If it was still children and education, I would still do that job, but I would very much like to be the Minister for Children and possibly community. But we'll have to see if that's a possibility.
Okay, thank you. And what about children within the parish? Do you think that you have enough facilities within the parish for children and young people, or is there something more that you feel you could do?
We do need more facilities. It's not particularly easy for parishes to create those facilities, perhaps without some sort of grant from the government, because we have to fund things from the rates. A relatively small play area in St Peter costs us £100,000. And when you think the whole parish has a budget of less than £1 million, that's a big commitment. But we haven't got enough facilities, and we have plans to do more. We just need the finance to do it.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder for those of you joining us at home, you can ask your questions live now to your Connétable candidate of St Peter, Richard Vibert. One of the other stories that are currently in the JP and issues that have obviously come up quite a lot is for farming community. You know, people are pulling out of growing vegetables on the island. Is there more you feel you can do within your parish to support farmers?
I don't know if we can do more as a parish, but I certainly believe that the government can do more. European farmers receive vast subsidies. Our farmers don't receive, they only receive very small amounts. If we truly want to be in some way self-sufficient with vegetables and that sort of produce, then we need to assist our farmers. Otherwise, the agricultural industry is going to die very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me one moment. And one of the other obviously huge problems which is causing a lot of people to leave Jersey is the housing crisis, that people just can't afford to buy housing. Do you think you've got the balance right within St Peter between the green fields and building new homes?
We had 5 fields, 3 sites that were rezoned in the island plan. Altogether, I think they'll be one of the biggest developments in the island that came out of the island plan. I think the disappointment was that very little weighting was given whether it was an agricultural field or a non-agricultural field. And the non-agricultural field, the one that had already been classed by agriculture as not really being suitable for agriculture, was rejected. And the minister spoke, against it. And I was somewhat surprised that the criteria, when we were looking prior to the island plan, that there was an awful lot of weighting towards the location. How close was it to the shops? How close was it to the schools, etc.? And insufficient weighting to whether it was agricultural or not.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned schools and facilities there. Are you happy again with the balance of facilities within the parish?
From the schooling point of view, yes. And in fact, when we were looking at the island plan, one of the first things we did actually was talk to the school and education about whether, an additional 100, 120 houses was feasible, and they were quite happy that that was the case within our catchment area, that they could easily cope with that. Yes, we're lucky that we have a school with, facilities, green areas. Those schools in, particularly primary schools in St Helier aren't so lucky. Okay,
thank you. And of course, one of the real burning issues again that candidates are having to deal with on a doorstep, which we're all having to deal with, is the rising cost of living. Is there a role, do you think, for the parish in helping people to tackle that, or is it something that needs to be done at the government level?
I think it needs to be done at a government level, but the parishes will always help people who are in particular need, and that is done with the utmost confidentiality. I have assisted people, and nobody is aware that has taken place, or who finds themselves in those circumstances. But the government is going to have to tackle the rising cost of food. We are going to see people who are unable to cope with that rising cost. And of course, with the unforeseen, we now have a war in Europe in effect, and we are going to see a massive rise in cost of certain goods, and we have to prepare for that, and we have to make sure that we have the right things in place by way of social security, etc., to help those people who are in need.
Thank you. Okay, and quite a few candidates have been asked directly, would you support taking GST off food?
That is an interesting one. If it could be easily achieved, I probably would support it. The reason that I haven't supported it in the past is because GST has been a very easy tax to implement, because it's 5% on absolutely everything. As soon as you start to say, well, we're not going to have it on this, we're not going to have it on that, it becomes more complicated. It's more costly for shops to administer. But that is my only reasoning behind that. If I thought it would make a difference to people, and yes it will, then I would support it.
Okay, thank you. And what about the question of, would you support raising the minimum wage to a living wage?
Absolutely. I think if you look at my voting record on this, I have actually always supported increases to the living wage. I think it's something we have to achieve, and it's actually in my manifesto. Okay,
thank you. Now, I suppose countering that, the people who run small businesses might come back and say it might be difficult for small businesses. Do you think that we support small businesses enough in Jersey? They're obviously the lifeblood of the economy as well.
I think this is this comes back almost to the same issue as agriculture. And I think there are ways that we could help small businesses. I've often thought that whilst we're paying the living wage, then a way of helping businesses under, say, a certain turnover is that they would pay lower social security contributions. And so the government, in effect, would take the hit. The business would remain profitable. The workers would get a living wage. And I think that would be a fair way of doing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Jersey care model, it's been raised quite often that it's, for some families, it doesn't seem to be working. It's causing a lot of stress. Do you think it's working? Do you think more could be done in that?
I have concerns about the care model, about it moves to a role of more care in the community, receiving more care at home, changes to GPs. I do have concerns about whether we'll be able to achieve that. It's early days, but I think if we see that it's not working, then we must be ready to make the necessary changes and not just keep on with the same mantra, well, this is the care model, and this is what we're sticking to. We've got to remain flexible.
Okay. Now, we've seen a lot of stories about people leaving the island, particularly young people. Is there anything you think you could do? I mean, obviously you can't do an awful lot in the parishes, but what kind of support would you like to see the government giving to encourage young people to stay in the island?
Right. Well, I mean, when I've been on the doorstep, and I have met people who are actually leaving the island, and the major reason for leaving the island was not employment but accommodation, and we have to resolve that. I know we said we were short of 7,000 houses because we haven't got a population policy. Do we really know actually how many houses we are short of now? But I feel that there are probably states buildings that could be converted into accommodation. There are certainly former office buildings, if planning were to allow it, that could be converted into accommodation. And I think that would bring the price down, particularly of rented accommodation. And I think that is the major thing we've got to tackle.
And the other question that's come up quite a lot related to that has been rent control. Do you think there should be more rent controls, or how would you see that developing in the next term?
Rent controls is a difficult one, because you start to introduce rent controls and then landlords start to sell off property because they're not happy. Can have a negative effect. I'd have to be convinced if there was a rent control scheme that wasn't then going to have an adverse effect on the number of units that then became available, and that people didn't just withdraw from the market saying, well, it's no longer feasible to rent these properties, I'm selling up. yes, but it would have to be a scheme that I was happy with.
Okay, thank you. And to those at home, last couple of minutes to get your questions in. So if you do have a burning question for St Peter Connétable candidate Richard Vibert, then please do get your questions in now. We've talked a bit about the environment. Do you think that the government's targets are high enough, ambitious enough?
I'm not sure that they've actually done enough. Let alone that the targets are ambitious enough. We have said that, part of our taxes are creating a fund for, reducing our carbon footprint, etc. But there's not a great deal of evidence out there that we're doing a great deal. We should be pushing for the use of renewable fuels. Jersey is perhaps extremely lucky that it has wind and tidal power that we should be looking at now. It might be 10 years away before we can actually use them, but we should be progressing that, and that would drastically reduce our carbon footprint. So I think that no, we're probably not doing enough.
Okay, thank you. And now just kind of turning it back to you for the last minute or so. What would you say your kind of, for people that don't know you, and obviously there'll be a lot of parishioners who do know you because you've already been Connétable, what would you say your leadership style is and what you bring to the table as constable candidate?
I think I'm somebody who'll consider issues and do research, and for instance, when I say that I would like to be, the children's minister, I have looked at the very complex issues we have with, we have children, there's antisocial behaviour, there's graffiti, there's minor crime, but what are the real causes of that? So I've done, for instance, in that case, done an awful lot of research, and I think when I bring something to the table, I got the facts to back it up. So I'm not sort of spontaneous. I'm not very good at spontaneous, but when I do bring something, I know that I can be convincing, and I know that what I'm bringing is backed up by facts.
And have you had any surprises on the doorstep? So we've talked about quite a lot of issues. Has there been anything that surprised you that you weren't aware of? Have you gone around talking to people? Not surprising, but I wasn't really anticipating as many people being unhappy with the electoral system. I would say that 2/3 of the people that I've met have brought up the electoral system and their unhappiness with it. And I think that was a surprise. Okay, and final question to you now is if you could think forward now and for 4 years and then look back on if you were elected those 4 years that you've just done, what would you like to see as your legacy for those 4 years coming up? I would like I think my legacy would be, I would like to see those sites in St Peter's developed, those housing sites for the benefit of the whole island. And I made that quite clear in the debate that I didn't believe really in the sort of old parish housing scheme where there was a parish connection. It's got to be a scheme that is good for St Peter's, but it also has to have an island-wide impact and provide those houses that we urgently need. And if that starts by the time that I finish my 4-year term, I'll be very happy. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you to Richard Vibert, St Peter Connétable candidate, and thank you to you at home for tuning in this evening for your questions. And that's all from us. And don't forget, you got to vote. It's less than a week to go. And you can also do the pre-poll because that's open in town at St Paul's Centre, but do take your photo ID with you if you do go. So make sure you get out there and get voting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard.